Soon come.
Brother Wood?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Do you know if the microphone and the camera are up in the classroom?
Yes, sir.
All right. I cannot see the classroom.
Only Brother Nicholas is in the class, sir.
Are you in the classroom?
Yes, sir. Yes, I am.
Okay.
Can you see Brother Nicholas, sir? Raise your hand.
You can see him.
Okay. Good morning, Brother Wright. How are you?
I'm well. How are you, Brother Buckland?
I'm fine, thanks. Okay, in a few minutes, we're going to be starting our communication studies class. It is about the time to start.
Then there's no need for the light, man. Not the light. You can see me, so yeah.
Okay, let us go to God in prayer. Father in heaven, I give you thanks for this new day that you have given to us. I give you thanks for life, for health, and for strength. And for those who are not well, I pray that your healing hands will be upon them and that you will restore them to their complete health and strength. I give you thanks, dear Father, for the live streaming of this class onto YouTube. And I pray that it will facilitate students getting access to their classes on video, that they can review it and enhance their learning. Thank you, dear Lord, for the persons involved in streaming this live on YouTube. We pray, dear Father, you will bless our class in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to be taking the register now of those that are,
Amen.
are present. So as I call your name, let me know that you're there. Nicholas Golding.
Present, sir.
Okay. And Denver Wright.
Present, Brother Buckland.
Good, good. Okay. I'm going to be reteaching lesson 2, which is parts of speech, part 2, which was taught last week in light of the answers that were given to the classwork. I want to make sure before I move on to a new lesson that the adverbs and the adjectives in that lesson are fully understood. The general objectives of this reteaching of lesson number 2 is to define the direct object of a verb. 2, to identify the relationship between the subject and the direct object of a verb. 3, to identify what questions to ask the verb in order to find the direct object of a verb. 4, to define an adjective. 5, to identify the relationship between a noun and an adjective. 6, to define an adverb. And 7, to identify the relationship between a verb and an adverb. The specific objectives of this lesson are: 1, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what a direct object of a verb is. 2, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to point out what is the relationship between the subject and the direct object? 3, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explore 2 ways of finding out the direct object. 4, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to discuss 3 examples of the direct object. 5, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what an adjective is. 6, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to point out what is the relationship between an adjective and a noun. 7, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to discuss 3 examples of an adjective. 8, now what is in the red signifies the part that I am actually reteaching or emphasizing in the reteaching of this lesson. At the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify 5 adjectives in an oral exercise. 8, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what an adverb is. 9, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to point out the relationship between an adverb and a verb. 10, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to discuss 3 examples of how an adverb may be used. 11, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify 5 adverbs in an oral exercise. So let us look at the direct object of a verb. Number 1, a noun or a pronoun are 2 parts of speech that may be used as the direct object of a verb. Number 2, the direct object and the subject of a sentence are related, for it shows what the subject is doing. For example, the preacher preaches the gospel. The gospel tells what the preacher is preaching. He is preaching the gospel. Excuse me. Number 3, the direct object may be found by asking the verb either what or whom. If you're dealing with something that is a lesson or a teaching or an idea or a view, or if you're dealing with an object, like you're dealing with a table or a tree, or if you're dealing with a person, you would ask different questions. So if you're dealing with a teaching, an idea, an object, you would ask what of the verb. And if you're dealing with a person, you will ask the verb whom. For example, what is the preacher preaching? The answer to this question gives the direct object of the verb. The answer is the gospel. Another example is whom is the preacher preaching? The answer to this question gives the direct object of the verb. The answer is Christ. In the sentence, the preacher preaches Christ. Let me back up over here to number 2. Look at the sentence. The preacher preaches the gospel. How do we find the direct object? Well, we ask the verb the question, what is the preacher preaching? And the answer to that question gives you the direct object. In this case, it is the gospel. Or this next sentence, the preacher preaches Christ. Since we're dealing with a person, Christ, we will ask the verb preaches, whom is the preacher preaching? And the answer gives you the direct object, which is Christ. So up here, we're dealing with a teaching. We're dealing with the message. and we ask the verb, what is the preacher preaching? And the answer is the gospel. This is the direct object. Or in the case of this sentence, whom is the preacher preaching? The answer to that question gives you the direct object, and that is Christ. So you may find the direct object by asking the verb in the sentence, whatever sentence it is, either what, in the case that you're dealing with an idea or an object, or whom, in the case that you're dealing with a person, in order to find the direct object in this or that sentence. Any question on this matter of the direct object?
So,
No,
so
sir.
sir, once it's a direct object, it literally has said, what is the person doing? I could say it's preaching the gospel. Like,
That's right. So if you're
Okay.
dealing with if the person is doing something like preaching the gospel, because you're dealing with an idea or a message, then you would ask the question of the verb, what is that person doing? If the
Okay.
person is doing something that is related to, let us say, a person, let us say, the teacher is teaching Johnny. You may ask the verb, whom is the teacher teaching? And what would be your answer?
Johnny.
In the sentence, the teacher teaches Johnny. And you ask the verb, teaching, whom is the teacher teaching? What would be your answer? What would be the direct object?
John, teaches John.
Johnny, yes.
Yeah.
So that is how you find the direct object. Let me think of another example. Muhammad Ali. You know Muhammad Ali, do you? Golding.
Mhm.
You know about Muhammad Ali? He was a great fighter in the 1960s and the 1970s. I think
Okay.
even into the 80s. All right, let me use him as an example. Muhammad Ali boxed George Foreman. Now, these were two rivals in boxing, Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. Now, to find the direct object, you would ask the verb, since we're dealing with a person, Muhammad Ali is fighting George Foreman, whom did Muhammad Ali box? And the answer would be George Foreman. He would be the direct object. Okay, so you find the direct object in two ways. If you're dealing with a concept or idea or an object like a thing, you would ask the question of the verb, and the question would start with the word what. But if you're dealing with a person, you would ask the verb starting with the word in a sentence, you'd start with the word whom. Okay, so that is how we find the direct object. Any other question on the direct object? Okay, here are examples we looked at last week. Number one, the preacher preaches the gospel. So what do? You ask, what is the preacher preaching? And what would be the answer?
Gospel.
The gospel.
The gospel. So the gospel is the direct object. Number two, the preacher preaches Christ. So if you ask the question, whom is the preacher preaching? What would be the answer?
Christ.
The answer would be Christ. Christ would be the direct object. Number 3, God loved the world. And of course, the world here is not dealing with the world of nature like trees and rivers, mountains and valleys. Sometimes the world is referring to people. So God loved the world. So you ask the question, whom did God love? And what would be the answer?
Word.
The answer
Word.
would be
The word.
the world, and that would be the direct object of the verb loved. Number 4, God gave his son. So you ask the verb the question, whom did God give? And what is the answer? His son.
Son.
So that would be the direct object. Number 5, God sent his son. You ask the question, since you're dealing with a person, whom did God send? And what would be the answer?
Son.
His son. That would be the direct object. Number 6, the apostles healed the sick. Again, you're dealing with persons. Whom did the apostles heal? And what is the answer?
The sick.
That's right. So that is the direct object of the verb healed. Number 7, Saul persecuted the church. And because we know that in the New Testament scriptures, the church does not refer to a building, but to the assembly of Christians, we're dealing with people who are Christians. So Saul persecuted the church. How do we find the direct object? We ask the question, whom did Saul persecute? And what is the answer?
Church.
The church. That is the direct object. Number 8, Saul saw Jesus. And so we're dealing with a person, which is the direct object of the verb saw. So we ask, whom did Saul see? And what would be the answer?
Jesus.
Jesus. That is the direct object of the verb saw. Number 9, Saul heard Jesus. Again, we're dealing with a person. So we ask the question, whom did Saul hear? And what is the answer? Jesus. So that is how you find the direct object. If you're dealing with a message or an object, like a tree or a plant, if you're dealing with a thing, neuter gender, then you would ask the question of the verb what. But as long as you're dealing with persons, you will ask the question starting with the word whom in order to find the direct object. Any further question on the direct object? Although both of you got this section of the classwork correct. I just want to make sure you understand. Any further question?
So,
No further question.
Okay, let us move on to adjectives. An adjective describes a noun. So there is a connection between the adjective and the noun. Now, the word noun refers to a naming word. It is a word that identifies someone or some place or something. For example, you, Nicholas,
yeah.
you are a student. And that word student is a noun. And same with Denville here. You are a student. So that is a naming word, that is a noun. But the adjective does something to the noun. It tells us more about the noun. what the noun is like. Yes.
Sir,
Yeah, I'm listening. Go ahead.
you were breaking up because of bad connection here. Can you repeat?
Okay. A noun is a word that names a person. Like you are Nicholas, that is your name. That's a noun. That's a proper noun. You are a student. That is another kind of noun called a common noun because you're not the only student in the world. Okay, so a noun names a person or it names a place. For example, you are from Goshen in Clarendon. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You're from Goshen. Goshen is the name of a place. It also names a thing. Let us say that you have a pen right there on the table, or a notepad or an exercise book. That is a noun because it is naming certain things. But an adjective tells us more information about the noun. It describes a noun. For example, in a sentence like the man, you just have the definite article the and the noun man. But then if I want to tell you what kind of man this is, I might say the tall man. Now that gives you more information about the man. Tall would be an adjective. Man is a noun, but tall would be an adjective. Or if I say the short man, that is telling you something else about another man. If I tell you the intelligent man, I'm telling you something about the brightness of that person's mind. So an adjective describes a noun. It gives you more information about that person or that place or thing. Here are the examples that were used last week. Examples of how an adjective describes a noun are as follows. 1, the genuine preacher. Now the word in all capital letters is an adjective. The preacher itself refers to a noun. Okay, so if I just said the preacher, that would tell me something about this person, that this person is proclaiming or declaring a message. And if he's a Christian, he's presenting the message about Jesus and his salvation. But when you add the word genuine, it is telling me something more about this man, that he is a sincere person. He does not pretend. When he preaches, he lives by what he preaches, the genuine preacher. So notice that genuine describes preacher by showing what kind of person the preacher is. The preacher is not a hypocrite, but he is a sincere person who is following the teachings of Jesus Christ from his heart. So preacher is noun, genuine is adjective. Here is another example. The Holy Scriptures. I have holy in all capital letters. Now the word scriptures itself is a noun, and it refers to writings. The word scriptures literally means writings. But holy tells us that it is a special kind of writing. Notice that holy describes scriptures. The scriptures are holy because they were spoken by God through the Holy Spirit to men of God who wrote down what he said. These scriptures are set apart from all other writings. They're not the same as the writing of Oliver Twist. They're not the same as Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer. They're not the same as our history books that we used in our classes in high school or prep school. It's not the same as the Jamaica Gleaner or the Jamaica Observer. These scriptures are different from all other writings because they came from God's mouth. So they're holy. Holy describes what kind of writings these are. Or in the third example, the true God. God is a noun. It identifies the supreme being. But you know, when you read the Old Testament and the New Testament, not everybody in the world believed in the true God. Some people worship false gods. So when you use the word true, what you're doing is describing God. And you are showing that he is true. Okay, so true is an adjective that describes God. All other gods and goddesses are false. True means that the God who has revealed himself in the Holy Scriptures is the real God. Now here we come to the classwork that was done last week. So we're looking at clarification of adjective based on the classwork. So the first sentence was the true God loved the world. In this section, we're looking at adjectives. The true God loved the world. The adjective describes the noun. In the first sentence, the noun is God. The adjective usually comes immediately before the noun. Which word in sentence 1 describes the noun God? Anyone?
True.
That's right, true. True describes the noun God. So true is the adjective in number 1. Number 2, the genuine preacher preaches the gospel. The noun is preacher. Which word comes immediately before preacher and describes him?
Genuine.
Genuine.
Genuine. Genuine is the adjective. Noun is the preacher is the noun. So genuine is describing preacher. Number 3, the Holy Scriptures were spoken by God and written down by men. Now the noun in the sentence is scriptures. This is a part of the sentence I'm dealing with here. The noun is scriptures. Which word comes immediately before scriptures and describes them?
Holy.
Holy. So here you have the adjective. The noun is scriptures, but the adjective is holy. Number 4, the sinful world needs salvation. The noun is world. Which word comes immediately before the noun and describes it?
Sinful.
Here it is. This comes immediately before the noun. Here is the noun. This comes immediately before the noun and tells us what kind of world it is. It is the sinful world. Number 5, the blameless Jesus died for sinners. The noun is Jesus. Which word comes immediately before the noun and describes him?
Blameless.
Blameless. So blameless is the adjective. Any question on this? Anything that is not clear in this? Okay, let us move on to adverbs. An adverb describes a verb. Just like an adjective describes a noun, an adverb describes a verb. You know, an adverb is made up of, the word adverb is made up of 2 parts. You have the word ad and you have the word verb. So you can get a good idea about what an adverb does. adds. It adds information about the verb. Add verb, just like adjective. Notice add is at the beginning. So something is being added to the noun. Some information about the noun is being given to tell you more about the noun. Genuine preacher, holy scriptures, true God. It's adding some information to the noun. Well, similarly, the adverb is describing a verb. It is giving you more information about the action that is expressed in the verb. For example, the preacher preaches the gospel effectively. Now, even if we remove the words the gospel, maybe you'll be able to see it better. If I remove the words from the sentence, the gospel, and just have the preacher preaches effectively, what we have here is that the word effectively is describing preaches, which is the verb, by showing how the preacher preaches. Okay, so if you just have the preacher preaches effectively, you know that preaches is the verb. What is the adverb doing to the verb preaches? It is telling you how he preaches. He preaches effectively. Here's another example. The preacher preaches the gospel today. Let us remove the words the gospel to simplify the sentence and just say the preacher preaches today. The verb is preaches, and the adverb is adding some information about the time when the preacher preaches. And the word today tells you the time. The preacher preaches today. So today preaches the verb by showing when the preacher preaches. It's giving you more information. It tells you how the preacher preaches. He preaches effectively. It tells you when he preaches today. Now, number 3, the preacher drove. Let us take out the words the car to make the sentence simpler. The preacher drove easterly. Okay, so the preacher drove easterly. Drove is the verb. It's the action of driving in the past. You're reporting what happened in the past. Drove. Easterly tells you more about the direction where he drove. He drove towards the eastern part, whether it is the eastern part of a city, or the eastern part of a parish, or the eastern part of an island, or the eastern part of a state. It tells you where the preacher drove. So whether it is how, or when, or where, an adverb describes a verb by adding some information to the action expressed by the verb. Any question on this? I will make things easier in letting you know that in the English language, most adverbs end in ly. Most adverbs end in ly, but not all of them. That is why I didn't emphasize that, because today is an adverb. So not all adverbs end with ly. The basic meaning of the adverb is that it adds information to the action expressed by the verb. but a lot of them, a lot of adverbs end in ly. So that is one of the ways you can identify an adverb. Look for the ly, but don't completely rely on that, because basically what you're looking for is a word that is describing the verb, telling you how the person did something, okay? Or when the person did something, or where the person did something. Okay, so this is clarification of adverb based on the classwork. Number one, God greatly loved the world. You could also say God loved greatly the world, or God loved the world greatly. But I put it here beside the verb to help you understand the relationship between the verb and the adverb. God, let us find the verb first. The verb is a doing word. It sometimes describes the state of one's being. But in these examples, we're dealing with action, with something that is done. So the verb here is loved. Is there any word that is describing how much God loved the world? The adverb describes the verb. The verb is loved. Which word describes how much God loved? Who would like to tell me what they think?
Greatly, sir.
Greatly. Greatly. It tells you how much God loved. God greatly loved the world. And so we find this is adding more information to the verb, which expresses action. God loved, but how much? Greatly. So that is a description of the love. God greatly loved the world. Number two, the preacher preaches the gospel enthusiastically. Let me take out the words the gospel to make the sentence simpler. The preacher preaches enthusiastically. Now, preaches is the verb. The preacher is proclaiming, declaring, announcing. But is there a word that describes how he is preaching? So we know that the verb is preaches. Which word describes the way in which the preacher preaches?
Enthusiastically.
Enthusiastically. That means he is really excited about what he is telling the audience about, or whom he is telling the audience about. He's putting his heart and soul into the message. So he is doing this enthusiastically. It's adding something to the verb. Number three, the Philippian jailer was baptized immediately. Let's find the verb first. Was baptized is a verb. Is there a word that describes when the Philippian jailer was baptized? Adding more information to the verb was baptized? Yes. We know in Acts chapter 16 that the Philippian jailer was baptized the same hour of the night, which is sometime after midnight. So he didn't wait until morning. He and his family were baptized the same hour of the night. So immediately is the adverb that describes when this took place. When he and his family were baptized, it was immediately.
No.
Number four, the Lord added the saved to the church daily. Now the verb is added. Here it is. The verb is added. which word describes the rate of the addition of new persons to the church?
Really?
Did it happen weekly?
Really?
Did it happen monthly? Did it happen yearly? No, it happened
Really?
daily. The addition took place every day. Okay, so daily is an adverb. Notice the ly. Notice the ly here. Notice the ly. A lot of English adverbs may be identified with the ly ending. So the verb is added, and the rate of the addition of new persons to the church is daily. Number 5, Jesus is coming soon. First of all, let us look for the verb. The verb is coming. Which word describes when Jesus is coming? The word soon. So you're not just saying that Jesus is coming, but you're telling when he is coming. Of course, you're not telling the day or the hour when he's coming, because no one knows that. Not even the Son, only the Father. But we can know that he's coming soon. So it tells you when he is coming. So the adverb adds more information to the verb. It tells you how much God loved. It tells you the way in which the preacher preaches. It tells you when the Philippian jailer was baptized. It describes the rate of the addition of new persons to the church daily. It tells you when Jesus is coming soon. So the adverb describes the verb by adding more information to the verb. The adjective adds more information to the noun. Bear that in mind. Okay, any question on the adverb?
That's all good. I know comes me they get mixed up with it in our first place, but I understand it clear.
All right, that's good. Okay, I'm going to be starting the next lesson. I'll be finishing up in about 6 minutes, but I'll start the next lesson right now. So I'm going to share another PowerPoint, and let me get into the share part here. Okay. Okay, so we're looking at lesson number 3, parts of speech, part 3. We're going to be looking at noun as the indirect object. I think this would be the only part we will look at today because of the time. Next week, we will look at the remaining part of the lesson, preposition, conjunction, and interjection. The general objectives of this lesson are 1, to examine the indirect object of a verb. 2, to examine prepositions, which we will start next week. 3, to examine conjunctions. 4, to examine interjections. With that, we will finish the first segment of our syllabus dealing with parts of speech. The specific objectives are 1, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what an indirect object is. 2, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify the indirect object in different sentences. 3, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what a preposition is. 4, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify the preposition in different sentences. 5, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what a conjunction is. 7, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify the conjunction in different sentences. 8, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what an interjection is. And number 9, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify the interjection in different sentences. So we're looking now at the indirect object of a verb. Number 1, the indirect object is a noun or a pronoun. So let us just get that fact first. What is called the indirect object can consist of either a noun, which is a word that names a person, place, thing, or idea, or a pronoun, which stands in place of a noun. The indirect object could be either of them, either a noun or a pronoun. Another thing about it, in number 1, is that the indirect object comes after the direct object of a verb. So the first object you will come to in a sentence is the direct object. And after that, you will have the indirect object. Let me illustrate that so that it can be clear. We all like football, don't we? Golding, Wright, and myself, we all like
Yes.
football.
Yes.
Now, let us say I kicked the ball to Denville Wright. And, okay, I kicked the ball to Denville Wright. Let us deal with that sentence alone. I is the subject, that's the pronoun, I. Kicked is the verb. The ball is the direct object. It got my foot. It felt the kick. Well, it didn't feel anything, but it got the kick. And the ball, so the ball is the direct object. That's the first object you come to in a sentence. I kicked what? What did I kick?
Ball.
That gives you the direct object, the ball. And then the remainder of the sentence is the indirect object. To Denville Wright. This tells you that the ball eventually went to one of the players on the team, Denville Wright. So I kicked the ball to Denville Wright. To Denville Wright is the indirect object. The first object was the ball, but the ultimate object of kicking the ball was so that Denville Wright could get it. So the first object in the sentence is the direct object. I kicked the ball. What did I kick? The ball. To whom did you kick the ball? To Denville Wright. He is the indirect object. The first object is the direct object. The second object in the sentence is the indirect object. I kicked the ball. The ball is the direct object, the first object. To Denville Wright. He is the second object, the indirect object, because I wanted the ball to go to him. I wasn't just kicking the ball just to kick it. My purpose was so that the ball would go to Denville Wright. He is the indirect object. So the indirect object is a noun. In this case, Denville Wright is the noun, which comes after the direct object of a verb. The direct object was the ball, and Denville Wright comes after the direct object, the ball. I kicked the ball, direct object, the ball, to Denville Wright. He's the second object, the indirect object. Okay, I'm going to have to end at this point. And God willing, next week we will continue on lesson number 3. You will get the PowerPoints of both lessons later on today. And because it is being streamlined, because it is being streamed live onto YouTube, if you go to JSP Mona on the YouTube, you will be able to see today's lesson, okay, and get immediate access to it without it being sent to your email. Okay, so that's the purpose of Brother Wood streaming it live at this time on YouTube. JSP Mona, all capital letters, JSP Mona, that gives you the YouTube channel on which you will see this lesson and other year 1 lessons that you are taking. Okay, all the best for the rest of the day, and I will see you later in the Hebrew class coming up later.
Thank you.
Any further question before I go? Okay, take care.
Thank you. Thank you, brother.
You're welcome.